The Talmud says that the seal of God is truth. It doesn't say that the seal of God is orthodoxy. The seal of God is truth. If an honest quest for truth in my service of God, and I see that quest for truth as an integral component of my religious and spiritual quest, then if I honestly feel that my God is not an orthodox God, so be it.
Yehudah DovBer Zirkind grew up in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, New York, and studied at various Chabad yeshivas around the world before making Aliyah in 2006. He is currently a senior research fellow at the David Cardozo Academy in Jerusalem. In addition, he is a researcher, writer, and lecturer on a wide range of topics in the field of academic Jewish studies. Yehudah is currently a graduate student of Yiddish literature at Tel Aviv University. The topic of his forthcoming dissertation is entitled "The Sacred, the Secular, and the Sacrilegious in the Life and Literary Works of Chaim Grade." His research interests include contemporary Jewish thought, Yiddish and Hebrew literature, Neo-Hasidism, Yiddish music and folklore, and Jewish bibliography. Yehudah DovBer, it is a pleasure to have you. Besides for all of your academic accolades, which are rich and impressive, Yehudah DovBer is a close and dear friend of mine, and I dare say a mentor, both intellectually and spiritually. Yehudah DovBer, please.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks, Zev. Thanks for hosting me, and it's always a pleasure and an honor and a privilege and a novelty, I must say, especially during this pandemic and coronavirus where our routine has changed drastically. So hearing ideas and reflecting is becoming more of a mainstay now for many people. And I also share that. And I also feel that certain ideas which under the routine may be kept under wraps because we're facing such drastically different times now. So the time might be right to deal more forthrightly with burning issues. As one of the reasons I'm reaching out to you and we're having this discussion is because what I see in your project, Seekers of Unity, is a very strong kinship to where I am holding. And in my own, also very much parallel to my own process of what the Zalman Schachter called a paradigm shift. Meaning that post-Shavira, post-rupture, we reevaluate our religion. We slaughter a lot of sacred cows, we do. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean we need to give up everything entirely. And in a letter to you, actually, which came as a follow-up to our first interview, I wrote that I use the analogy of the difference between Ptolemy's cosmology and the Copernican cosmology. And I used it in multiple ways, and I'll kind of unpack it. I use it on a paradigm on two levels. One level is that a very raw way, I feel, especially for myself, that I cannot continue preaching Ptolemy's cosmology when I believe in the Copernican model. So my point is not to say that I'm a denier, I'm a non-believer, but I believe differently. I believe differently. And I feel that it is high time, I need to come out and be honest that I believe differently. That has been a difficulty for me in my personal life because I look the part and I have that background knowledge and I still nurture a lot of religious and spiritual nourishment from that religious tradition. Yet I need to be honest that my astronomical or cosmological model has shifted. Now there are those that are going to claim, and I'm going to again stretch that metaphor further because I like metaphors, that religion is not astronomy, that religion is astrology, i.e. nonsense, and therefore drop it all. But I don't think so. I think that once we have a more mature understanding of what religion is, or the way I put it in even a minimalistic term, as the human quest for the transcendent, which doesn't necessarily entail I mean, in this conception, I'm just for theoretical purposes, the human quest for the transcendent does not necessarily need to involve God. In that sense, it can be like Buddhism, that there is a deep religious or spiritual instinct or impulse, which is not conceived of in theistic terms. But I think that that impulse, call it more religion, more spirituality, is shared for everyone. So I think on a rock bottom level, uh, being religious does not necessarily need to mean that you believe a specific dogma. It can mean, it's just the way I say, it's more about, it isn't about facts so much, it's about a certain orientation to life in the universe. That is what religion is all about. And religion is something that is shared among everyone. I don't think that Judaism has a monopoly on religion. I think all faith, I see the beauty of the universality of religion. Unity in diversity. In other words, there are many, many different faiths, but I think the essential impulse of each faith is similar. That quest for the transcendent, how they conceive of the transcendent, how they approach the divine is very different. But the approach to the divine is something that all faiths share in one way or another. You know, I'm referring now to perennialist thought and other similar philosophies or theologies. And that's very much your place. So when we realize that religion is universal and your faith is particular, and that there's a tension between the two, which is very different than the model that I grew up with, which is that Judaism is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and all other faiths are full of falsehood and lies, and therefore religion and Judaism and truth are all wrapped up into one. What shattered for me is no, religion is not dependent on Judaism. And also Judaism is not dependent on religion. In other words, I would tell people, even if you don't consider yourself religious anymore, you can still maintain a spiritual connection to your tradition as part of your Jewish identity. And that was also part of my reformulation of my connection to Judaism. In other words, by saying that I'm Jewish, I'm no longer saying, like some of my Orthodox co-religionists, that I am an Orthodox Jew because this is the truth. I'm saying I am Jewish because I identify as a Jew. I'm observant because I identify as a Jew, and I believe in it. I have faith in it that it can sustain me religiously and spiritually. And I think the major metamorphosis is one from truth to meaning. In other words, we're no longer playing, for me at least, we're no longer playing the medieval game, that kind of sibling rivalry and sibling triumphalism of, no, Jesus is the real God. No, the God of Israel is the real God. That kind of sibling rivalry, which each one is claiming exclusive rights for being the firstborn or being God's chosen. That's an old-fashioned paradigm. I think we've realized today that we are all brothers and that we're all one. And I think that has been a very good revelation. And we're no longer in this mortal struggle of who is going to be the absolute chosen, the absolute one. So therefore, Judaism becomes an issue of meaning. It becomes an issue of spirituality. It becomes an issue of connection. And therefore, looked at it that way, I challenge my friends, those that feel that they need to give up everything. You know, while I understand you, friends or brothers and sisters, I understand where you're coming from, and I'm not judging you. I understand for certain people, religion just doesn't work for them. But if you've experienced something that I have, which is questioning your faith, I don't think the only logical alternative is to completely get rid of it. What I'm saying is that we need to create a luchos sheniyos, a second set of tablets. And the Talmud says something very, very interesting. The Talmud says that the shivrei luchos munachos ba'arim, that the fragments, the shards of the first set of tablets, the broken pieces of the first set of tablets, were still kept in the ark, in the temple, alongside, in the Holy of Holies, alongside the complete tablets. I think it's a very, very profound message. I'll share an anecdote, and then I'll let you talk, Zev, because I spoke enough. I'll share an anecdote that I think is most telling for me and the whole endeavor. Many years ago, in the beginning of my religious journey, I read an article doing a comparative study between the Torah and the ancient Near Eastern laws. And I discovered that the law of the goring ox, as is known from Parshat Mishpatim, a section in the book of Exodus, has very similar parallels to ancient Near Eastern codes, such as the laws of Hammurabi, the laws of Eshnuna, to the point that there are even linguistic features and definitely semantic features that are almost identical. And for me, that was an earthquake. You cannot imagine what it meant for somebody who has been taught that the actual letters of the Bible, the words of the Bible, they're an emanation of supernal godly wisdom. And this is a form of divine revelation, not only in terms of this is an order issued by God, but the actual verses contain holiness. The actual verses are expressing the intimate will of God. And then learning that, so for all appearances, these laws were based or mimic the surrounding culture. That was a shattering experience for me. So I remember I made a meeting. I arranged a meeting with a professor. The professor who actually wrote that article that shattered, that basically shattered my faith. And he happened to be a religious person himself, an observant Jew himself. And I turned to him and I said, listen, I need to talk to you. I read your article and this is devastating stuff. And we agreed to go out in Central Park in Manhattan. This is, must have been about, when was this? 2002, 3, 4, whatever. It was many years ago. And he was very nice. And we met up and we had this long talk for like 4 or 5 hours. And I said, Professor so-and-so, I want to ask you a question. I said, I am an amateur. This is new to me. I said, many times you can be fooled by superficial similarities. For example, I don't know if I said it, but I'm just thinking now. For example, you see Amish and you see ultra-Orthodox Jews. Some people may be forgiven for thinking that they're the same tribe. Because they look alike, but in a sense they're not. They're completely different. Their faith is different. Yes, there is a certain external similarity, but it ends there. At least I cannot say that the Jewish community emerged from the Amish. Yes, they're both conservative cultures and they dress a certain way because that was the way people dressed then, whatever. If I dig deeper, I can find the reasons for that common ancestor, cultural ancestor. Anyway, so I told him, I said, listen, I'm an amateur. I'm new to this game. Do you think that all this that you showed is just a superficial connection? But when you dig deeper, you'll see that really you cannot compare the Torah to the ancient Near Eastern culture, or it doesn't make sense to say that it emerged from that context. Or you, as somebody who studied it, will tell me that the more I look, the more I'll find. And he said, the latter is true. So I'm not gonna lie to you. The latter is true. And I spent like 20 years studying this. I still have a very avid and keen interest in this field of the Torah within the context of the ancient Near East. And what it did for me is, obviously on a very basic level, it makes you question the notion of divine revelation. How can you say that these words were dictated by God to Moses if they seem to be appropriated from the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Code of Hammurabi, or similar texts? And then as I started becoming more advanced in my reading and studies and the comparative method and the historical critical method, these questions were compounded. So bottom line, as I said, because I realized, or the way I believe now, that the Torah, definitely part of the Torah has emerged from within the context of the surrounding cultures. So it also means that we need to open up when we think about faith. We can no longer say that truth exists in a bubble. We need to like, there are many people, for example, Orthodox Jews will say, let's say, will push back against the move for greater egalitarianism within Judaism, and they're going to say we should we shouldn't grant women greater equality because that is a problem of following the secular zeitgeist. But what happens if you discover that many laws of the Torah were also a product of a certain zeitgeist? In other words, you turn it on its head. Then you're saying, but the laws of the Torah are also a product of a certain zeitgeist. I'll show you where it emerges from a specific culture. Anyway, so to make a long story short, I remember I spoke to this professor and he told me the more I'll look, the more I'll find. And I remember I came home and I was spent. I was exhausted. This was on a Friday. I slept throughout the whole Shabbos, the whole Shabbat, because I felt like, okay, you know, what do I do? For me, I think for somebody who hasn't gone through it, they won't understand it. For somebody who hadn't grown up in a fundamentalist faith where we're taught that the words of the Bible were literally uttered by God himself, and that serves as a basis for the faith, I was crushed. And I didn't know what to do. I was all over the place. Like, can I still be religious? Does it make sense to observe anything? And I remember the professor knowing, obviously, seeing my distress. He emailed me a short while later. He asked, how you doing? How you doing, Yehudah DovBer? You know, we spoke. How you doing, sir? So I told him, you know what? I had an epiphany. I told him. I said, I realized that I'm no longer looking for answers to questions because there are no answers. The questions prove that you need to change your paradigm. Right? Galileo or Kepler, they sought out the truth and it led them in a different direction than Ptolemy's cosmology. But I said, the challenge for me is not how to find an answer to a question, but how to find a modus vivendi of dealing with a challenge. And that's a completely different matter. The Talmud says that the seal of God is truth. It doesn't say that the seal of God is orthodoxy. The seal of God is truth. If an honest quest for truth in my service of God, and I see the truth, that quest for truth as an integral component of my religious and spiritual quest, then if I honestly feel that my God is not an orthodox God, so be it. In other words, I think people are so stuck in the fundamentalism of orthodoxy, as I've even heard a Hasidic critique of what's going on, that they've made an avodah zarah, an idol, out of orthodoxy. Where does it say that orthodoxy is trumps everything? I feel that truth, religious truth, the honest quest for truth, is more important, and therefore I am at odds with people who feel that being orthodox or their allegiance to their particular faith group trumps all else. No, I feel that God will respect a lot more a person who is on an honest quest than somebody who is just going through the motions. And that also leads me to the creation, your thing that I want to share some ideas and exchange some thoughts with you. The Seekers of Unity, which I think can also help people in my boat. People that are searching for a derech, people who are post-Orthodox, if you will. In other words, they're not necessarily secular. They're not necessarily saying that we don't want to have anything to do with Yiddishkeit, but they're not in a fundamentalist place anymore, and they're seeking. They're searching, they're seeking. Religion does not mean the same thing what it means for a rabbi in 770 Eastern Parkway preaching the gospel. Sorry for that comparison. It just isn't. And what can we do? I know there are many people like me out there. Maybe there is a valid quest for religion and spirituality beyond questions of religion and science. Maybe we need to look at things a little bit differently. Maybe the question of God is not a scientific question, i.e., who created the universe and what is the cause for the universe, but more a question about meaning. Like maybe there's a different conception of God than God the creator. Maybe it's God the soul of the world, ordering stuff, the infinite source of all life. I mean, there are many different ways you can think about it. And that kind of quest, I guess what I would envision, and also I think that people like that we discussed um, in the previous session, like Hillel Zeitlin, for example, Abraham Joshua Heschel, Louis Jacobs, these are all people who do the same thing. We are not koifrim, we are mevakshim. We are not non-believers, we are not atheists, we are seekers. I think that is a core difference. We haven't spelled the last word. We hadn't had our final say yet. We haven't nailed the coffin on religion. We question, we seek, we search. We may, for some people, we may be a bunch of sacred cow slaughterers. We might be just a bunch of demolishers. But as I view myself, I am not a deconstructionist. I'm a reconstructionist, small r, not to be confused with Mordecai Kaplan's movement. We are seeking to reconstruct religion, but we need a different paradigm. And if we're going to be presented, if our only engagement with astronomy can be based on a Ptolemaic model, it just won't work for us. And that, I think, is what we need to create here. We need to create an alternative for Mavakshim, for seekers who don't have all the answers. They're not dogmatic believers. Yet they feel like, what can Judaism mean for them? And so, Zev, I've pretty much said my piece for now. Thanks so much for listening. Sorry for a very, very long rant. Now I want to hear what you have to say.
No, please, Yehudah DovBer, please don't apologize. It's so inspiring and helpful to hear sort of internal thoughts vocalized and articulated from the outside back in. And even though our own journeys have been different and varied, and no two journeys are the same, there's still enough commonality for me to hear a lot of my own feelings reflected in yours. So don't apologize. I'm thinking there's one of two options. I could sort of reflect back and comment on things you've said, or I can take the conversation forward. And I feel like because we already had a very long conversation preceding this one where we delve more into these topics, I want to just sort of focus on the transition and then try and push gears to begin the uphill climb. And it's definitely an uphill battle. So there's, let's say there's two paradigms here, which I think you laid out very well. There's the paradigm of a deconstruction, to point out the flaws and the fallacies and the shortcomings, and certainly there are. And then the second approach is one where we begin to build from the ground up, when we begin to pick up the shattered pieces and reconstruct a new image. And an image made out of shattered pieces may turn into more of a mosaic than a complete sculpture, but that's okay. We'll have to take what we get. And hopefully if the light shines through it, it will be a stained glass mosaic and we can have some light shining through the brokenness. I just to kind of reflect on a personal side, I went through my own period of searching and questioning, and the place, I think that the intellectual zeitgeist of the religious community as a whole, without being too stereotypical about a big community which is made up of many different individuals who are very different from one another, but there is a certain truth-centeredness to it, where there's a search for the truth, where there's and I think a lot of scholastic thought is still very popular in contemporary Jewish circles, both Orthodox and non-Orthodox. Maimonides is hands down the most important contemporary Jewish thinker on the scene. And Maimonides is a very scholastic thinker, and something you mentioned a few times, and has a very rigorous approach to the truth. And although Maimonides himself is a very complicated character, and once one gets into him as an individual, things are a lot more colorful than the black and white picture. But at least the way that Maimonides is understood, largely, it's a very scholastic, very sort of, there's an absolute truth, and we can find it, and we can prove it, and we can disprove it, and we can use apologetics to come to that, and we have all sorts of teleological and ontological and arguments from first principles, and it's a very scholastic enterprise, the intellectual thought. And if you read a lot of contemporary apologetic works from the Orthodox community, it's shaped on that prism. And my own thought process was following down that path. And I was trying to figure out what is the truth, what are the proofs, how can I ground my faith on something rational. And at a certain point, I think in my 20s, I had a shift, and I'll have to think back to what precipitated that shift. But I kind of, it perhaps may have been because I was just familiarizing myself with the general trends of Western philosophy, where I moved from reading the scholastics, from reading the medieval thinkers, to more modern thought, to post-Cartesian, to people like Søren Kierkegaard, who was very influential on myself, all the way down through the modern existentialists, Heidegger and Sartre and Camus and the others. And what I realized, the point which the existentialists made, besides for their particular points of deconstruction and particular points of argumentation, the larger argument which came forth from them was that you cannot live on truth alone. And this is a very, perhaps a shocking idea to someone who hasn't explored existential thought and is still in an earlier paradigm. But truth is not what sets you free, contrary to all the slogans. It's meaning more than truth. It's purpose. It's a self-discovery of what authentically speaks to the person themselves, and a large syllogistic mathematical proof is not going to move someone internally. So I think that shift, and I'm not saying that we're here as a community and as a collective of individuals going to jump into the deep end of postmodernism where all facts are relative and nothing matters anyways, and it's all narrative. With putting that aside, I mean, there's place for postmodernism, but the acknowledgement that meaning matters more than information. That meaning fundamentally is something which has to speak to the individual on their terms, and it's about taking that, and it's almost like you have a page of sheet music. You have notes, and they can be lined up, and they can all work mathematically, and they can be in right order, and the cadence can be all set up. But unless you sit down at the piano and you play that music, and you put some energy into it, and you invest oneself, and you allow the poetry to emerge, to hear the music, you're going to be left with just a blank sheet of black and white sheet music. And I think what happens sometimes is that when we're stuck in this previous paradigm of seeking for truth, of making sure the notes are all correct, we actually forget to sit down by the piano, we forget to pick up the violin and play the notes, to hear the sound, to hear the poetry. So, and I deeply agree with what you said, that the project which we started here, which is a grassroots project, which is, thank God, now building a community around it, is about seekers of unity. And we're not here to destroy and to disprove and to lambast and to be iconoclastic, although sure, that's all part of the project, and there's time and place for that. But fundamentally, we're here to seek a collective narrative, not just of truth, but of meaning, and something which is done, and I think that meaning is really created both individually. The existentialists had a very strong focus on the individual, but I think part of the religious genius is that meaning is not just created individually, it's created communally. And meaning is made meaningful when it's shared and when it's collaborated on. So the project which I'm inviting all my friends, which I'm inviting you on to, and I think this is a project which has begun, and we're just beginning to see the sproutings of the seedling, is to see what meaning we can construct together. Max Weber, a sociologist who wrote a lot on the sociology of religion, speaks about three different paradigms of religious leadership. There's the magician, the priest, and the prophet. And the priest, leaving aside the magician, the priest is someone who works the institution, who builds a community, who nurtures the flock, and and I think we would identify that more with the leadership that we grew up with, the people who have all the answers, the people who are there as strong figures to take their crowd through a stormy night. And I'm not here to, I think neither of us are here to say that there isn't a role in psychology and in sociology for the priestly figure, for the institution, there is a place for that, because people need that figure in times of mourning, bereavement, celebration. It's very important to have that identity and have that figure. But I think there's also the prophetic role, which Max Weber speaks about. And Weber says that the prophetic role is really the most fundamental, because the prophetic role is the role which brings new life into the system. Because when things become too organized and too structured, if too much order, and you're lacking the vitality, you're lacking even sometimes a disruptive chaotic energy which challenges the paradigms that have been built. Because things that have been built for too long that aren't examined, they can become rusty, and they can become stultified, and they can begin to decay. And unless someone comes and shakes it up and says, guys, what is the meaning? And I think you touched on elements of the bankruptcy of religion, where there is a sense, I think, of an emptiness in the hallways and corridors of religiosity and of meaning and of new paradigms and new structures. So I want to, and I have my own ideas of new paradigms and things material which I've been working on and writing and disseminating. But I want to turn the conversation to you, leaving aside all of the problematic issues and all of the areas of Orthodox, as the sort of perhaps idolatrous Orthodox thought that is perhaps stuck in very old paradigms. Leaving that all aside, because we're not in team destroyers, and there are many people who are working to pick apart in healthy and unhealthy ways that thought. I want to shift gears and put the mic to you and ask, what in your own personal experience, in your collective experience, both yourself as a person, as a religious seeker, as a intellectual person, and here as part of the seekers group and community and family that's growing, what hope do you see? What directions do you see? What light can you shine on moving forward in terms of creating meaning, creating purpose, creating something which is true to the individual on sort of all those levels of being, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, communally? It's not a very specific question, but I'd like to open the conversation in that direction.
Okay, thanks, Ev. I appreciate what you said and your own sharing of the paradigms and different paradigms. And I couldn't agree with you more. And I also share that emphasis that we're not here just to destroy and to pick apart and demolish, but to build. So yes, there has been paradise lost to us who can no longer bask in the glory of a blissful, innocent paradise. And I guess for me, the direction would be as like kind of to reclaim that, trying to gain a taste of that paradise or make it more real, not just idealistic, and make it more real. And I guess thinking out loud with you, you didn't ask me this question before, and I don't have any scripted answers here, but I think first of all, the first steps are shared passion, shared people, and shared ideas. Finding people with a similar passion, a passion for this. This is a passion project for me. So I think we're all passionate, and I think we need a group of people that are also part of the cause. And I also think that's important, the ideas, in other words, the intellectual component is necessary. We're trying to find meaning. And I think both of us and many people in our groups are not just strictly analytical, intellectually curious thinkers, but we're existentialists, as you pointed out. We are, our intellectual discovery is really a discovery about meaning. And I think there is a need to provide an intellectual credo or manifesto for what it is that we are seeking. So for example, Art Green himself wrote his own alternative 13 Ani Maamin, I believe, which is basically mimicking Maimonides' 13 principles of faith. So he's not saying I don't believe. I don't believe. That isn't his statement. He's not saying, but what do I believe? You know, there was a series I think that BBC did many years ago, or maybe NPR, I don't remember right now, called "This I Believe." It was a series of personal, I guess, confessional testimonials of what they believe. Which, this is my God. You know what? You don't believe in the Rambam's Ani Maamin? Create your own Ani Maamin. You don't have your, and I don't mean credo in a dogmatic sense. I'm the farthest from that. I mean, Ani Maamin, what are your values? What are your principles? What keeps you going? What is it about Judaism that can still nurture people, even if they're in a post-Orthodox or post-fundamentalist mode? Is it Shabbos? Is it the value of community? Is it the value of studying? Is it the value of chesed, of doing kindness? Is it the value of that, of feeling called upon God to have a special mission in the world? What are the core values of Judaism, moving away from dogmas to values and spiritual teachings? I think that is where we need to go. So people like Art Green will take a Hasidic text, which is very provincial, and he'll universalize it. Or like he once said, and I think it's a very important, I am less concerned with whether or not there was a tabernacle in the temple, in the desert, in the wilderness, as the Torah describes. The main point is, Bilavavi Mishkan Evne, I will build a sanctuary within my heart. And there was also another mentor and teacher and friend of mine called Professor Yehudah Jerome Yehudah Gelman, who wrote a very interesting book called This Is From God, something along those lines, a new theology about Torah and history. His premise of the book is that I'm talking as if I were him. I can no longer believe that the stories as told in the Bible, or exactly as told in the Bible, occurred exactly how they were told in the Bible. In other words, I don't believe in the historical factuality or inerrancy of the Bible, of the Torah. And he tries to square it with a faith, still believing that the Torah contains divinely inspired, divinely revealed, or is a sacred scripture. And he takes a route, he says that Torah, the historical stories of the Torah have to be understood like we expressed last time about myths. Myths are telling you personal psychological truths in the form of a story. So he believes that we need to read the stories in the Torah based on a Hasidic reading, which is internalizing the story into the soul. So Mitzrayim, Egypt, no longer necessarily refers to a physical place. The most important part of the Torah is, what does it tell you about your own specific Mitzrayim, your own limitations? So I think there has definitely work has been done among Jewish renewal and other non-Orthodox thinkers, and even Orthodox thinkers. There's a tremendous amount. I'm not saying there's a tremendous body of teaching that can still be made relevant. I think that what we have to offer the most strongly, the gift that we can give to the world, is to take the core teachings of Judaism and universalize it. And I was actually listening to a lecture of a great teacher, though I never met him, we mentioned before, of Abraham Joshua Heschel. So he says, you know, that there is the famous saying that youth is wasted on the young. So he said, Judaism is wasted, and he wouldn't complete the sentence. It was saying Judaism is wasted on the Jews. In other words, we don't appreciate what Judaism has to offer. And again, I'm not denying the value of other faiths. I just feel that instead of going to Buddhism or non-Jewish faith, we have a treasure in our backyard. Maybe it isn't infallible. Maybe the diamond did not drop from the sky. Maybe it was created through a very long geological evolutionary process. It doesn't mean that it isn't a diamond. So translate it, discover it, polish it. I think Shabbos is one of the greatest institutions of Judaism. The prophetic voice within Judaism is amazing. Even the Jewish imagination that we find in the Aggadah and in Rabbi Nachman is beautiful. There are so many, the value of community, the value of charity. I mean, I can go on and on and on. And even within the Hasidic community, is a place where what I lost the most was the fervor, the intensity of sitting at a Hasidic Farbrengen, whether it was at the foot of the late Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson of saintly memory, or the Hasidim. And I'm sure it's true for other groups as well. There is an indescribable spiritual feeling in the air. There is a unity of purpose. There is an intense quest for something greater. So even if you don't necessarily subscribe to every particular group doctrine of the Hasidic Rebbes, We're living in a free country. We can mix and match. Like I have this joke that we grew up, Zev and I grew up in a community where there was only one Hasidic master. There was only one Rebbe. And if you were to mix and match and adapt or pledge allegiance to different Rebbes, I have this joke that it would be it would be polygamy at best and polytheism at worst. In other words, it's either a problem of idolatry or multiple relationships, or a problem of monogamy. But in other words, that is part of that very strong core of there is the one truth that you are fully committed to. We grew up with an enormous, especially I grew up growing up around Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he passed away when I was 14 years old, and I practically was a few houses away, half a block away from the house, 770 Eastern Parkway. When I was born, in my formative years, I lived within a half a block each direction, because I moved once, so it was either from one way or the other way. We're like a half a block away from 770. And I would go there almost every day for services, definitely on Shabbosim. I think it's very hard to describe. I once described to somebody that I felt as a kid as if I were standing at Mount Sinai receiving the Torah. That was the experience. For Hasidim, being around the Rebbe was an experience of a kind of divine revelation. Again, I'm not equating the Rebbe with God. What I'm saying is the spiritual magnetism and charisma and the spiritual potency of that experience was indescribable. And I think that all of us who have lost their faith mourn for that deep, gaping void left within us, that conviction that has been lost, that fire that has been extinguished, the passion, the yearning, it's indescribable. It's not something that I can describe to you. That feeling that not only of certainty of literally being spiritually intoxicated, okay, would be the best way of putting it. Like you're spiritually intoxicated, and then you wake up the next moment, huh? Like you're waking up from like a rude awakening. And it's that kind of religious intoxication which we're all seeking, as that paradise lost that we're seeking to rediscover. And yet we cannot put the genie back in the bottle. We cannot all of a sudden be innocent and retain that childhood innocence. The world isn't perfect. Religion isn't perfect. We know a lot more. Religion isn't infallible. It isn't flawless. And diamonds are also not flawless. It doesn't mean that we don't have a diamond. I envy people like my mother and people like her who have such a strong faith that it pulls them through thick and thin. But I think in our own ways, maybe we cannot create it in the same way that it exists in fundamentalist communities. But I think we need to articulate for ourselves and for the rest of the world, what is it that we find compelling there? There is something going on there. And I guess our challenge as being the in-betweeners, between both worlds, between the fervent religious community, but also dealing with doubt and the open world of postmodernism, okay, between fundamentalism and postmodernism, if you will, is to kind of create a product that I think that is our only hope. It will be viewed by some as critical and iconoclastic. There will be elements of it. But at the same time, we need to ensure that there will be people reading that same book or will be exposed to that same very ideas and will want to join that group. I think that is, for me, that is an idea that crystallized for us. That any way that our ultimate goal is to bring people closer. We are being critical, and people who read it are not going to have any illusions that we're selling that we're being fundamentalist apologists. And I guess I'm reflecting my own ambivalence or my own more mature, I hope, way of dealing with my past, which is not to view it as completely evil or completely negative, but to appreciate the great beauty in it and even yearn for that beauty, while at the same time realizing that I can no longer be fully within the fold. I hope that in some way.
Yeah. I think, Yehudah DovBer, I think you just touched on something really incredible and really powerful. And I think whatever comes of this conversation, it was worth us having it just for this point to be, I think it's been revealed in conversation, both to yourself and to me. And I think this is quite, I was thinking this whole time, like, what are we doing here? What are we contributing? And we both, you know, came to the same conclusion that we're here to build and we're here to seek and to shine light on that path for others. And then we spoke about in personal beliefs, individual truths, values, and all of that, as important as it is, it's already being done. There are so many people talking so beautifully about Jewish values and Jewish history and Jewish ethics. And I don't know, people, you have Harold Kushner and Avram Shua Heschel, and talking about the Shabbos and the prophetic experience and ethical monotheism, and that's all been so well written upon. And I think it occurred to me as you were talking, and I think this is what you said, that we find ourselves in a very unique sort of Venn diagram where we experienced the description that you spoke about, the description of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I was only born in 1994, so I didn't myself get to experience that, but I got to see the flame of the Rebbe reflected in the eyes of those who saw him, and that's something which I've spoken about publicly and made videos on. Having had that experience of the primacy of first-hand religious experience, to use William James's term, and yet to be open and critical and academic about our understanding of Judaism, places us, I think, in a very unique position, which, as you said, which I really love the way you put this, where we're not on the main derech, we're not off the derech, we're on our own derech, and we're searching that, and we're seeking that path to God. The juxtaposition of authentic first-hand religious fervor, the fire, the veritable theophany of and when you said that, it felt like standing at the foot of Sinai and hearing the revelation. I think that's not an exaggeration, and people that I've spoken to that have shared your experience described it the same way. And I think throughout religious literature and Jewish literature, there is a moment of the founding religious figure, be that Moses in Judaism, be that Muhammad in Islam, be that Jesus in Christianity, be that the Buddha, and whoever the character is, where there's a first-hand religious experience, there's a first-hand encounter with the divine through that individual. And what happens in religion is, and this, I'm not saying this to lecture you, this is what you know well, just for the audience, is that as that is passed down from generation to generation, it becomes first-hand and second-hand and third-hand, and we can tell our children about the thing we saw, about the thing our parents saw, about what they saw. Franz Rosenzweig, the German Jewish philosopher, calls it the ABCs of Judaism. You have the initial encounter, the Mosaic moment at Sinai. And then you have the B, which is talking about the A, and C talking about B, talking about A, and finally you get down to the XYZ, and you've forgotten that there ever was an ABC. And I think as individuals who both had a proximity to what I would call a real theophany, a real revelation of first-hand religiosity, of the divine in the human, and I'm using these words obviously with some flexibility here. So to encapsulate that authentic religious experience, and to understand it, to understand what it means intellectually, which means neurologically, sociologically, historically, contextually, and to not allow that to become reductionistic and to take away from the passion and from the life-givingness of that experience. and to try and both in ourselves, in our own lives, I think that's something which we seek after. We're searching for that experience, that collective unitive experience, unity with the divine, unity internally and communally and globally, which I think encapsulates the project largely, and to try and share that in a way that's rational and open-minded and persuasive, and optimistic to a broader community. And I mean, I'm really excited that this is sort of happening in live conversation. This is not rehearsed. This is not scripted. But just trying to figure out really what's the crux of the project here. And perhaps it's not about, we can all agree it's not about slaughtering more sacred cows. It's not about destroying. It's not even about finding truths. It's not even about finding values, but it's about tapping into that place of first-hand religiosity, something that we as the scions and as the heirs of the Hasidic community, and as the intimate, I think what's happened today is, and without sort of opening up the conversation too much into contemporary sociology of Jewish movements, but there's a very large neo-Hasidic movement which I think is trying to do this, where they're trying to tap into the deep religious pathos and experience in many phenomenal individuals that were geniuses of the tradition, the Kotzker and the Piasetzner and the Ishbitzer and the Maggid and Reb Nachman and Tzaddik HaKohen. But I think that most of that community is approaching these characters from a remove, from a distance, and we have the benefit of knowing these characters intimately, of growing up with them in childhood, in bedtime stories, in reading their literature in the first hand from the age of 5 and 6, and marrying that with a deep sensibility towards a progressive, both ethically and scientifically, and intellectual worldview. I think there's a potential. There's a real fire that could be kindled in that space. What do you think?
Well, that was absolutely magnificent, and I couldn't agree more with you. And I think that's essentially what the founders of neo-Hasidism, take Shlomo Carlebach and Zalman Schachter. I think that was part of their charisma. Part of their charisma was because they imbibed a certain language that was completely inaccessible to their students and disciples, because that flame would be too. It was a raw flame that can burn. For us, we were initiated into it and we were seared by it, for better or for worse. We were burned by the flame, or warmed by it and burned by it and seared by it. We were conditioned by it. And it's like when you cook something, it reaches a point of no return. We cannot turn back the clock. That changed us. That shaped us in a very, very fundamental way, for better or for worse. And yes, I totally agree with you that within the neo-Hasidic movement, there is a fear of experiencing it firsthand because they're afraid of being burnt by it. So they're looking for cultural mediators. They're looking for transitional figures, those that can take the flame and carry it into the foreign territory, who can relay it long distance. I think that is really the secret of. So yes, there's a tension between the gvilin, between the parchment, between the external forms, between the dogmatic articulation or dogmatic concretization of faith and its more spiritual core. And what the problem with religion is when, like you said, it isn't a direct, immediate experience. And that is why I find that even among modern Orthodox Jews, they're looking for an authentic firsthand Hasidic experience. Why? And I like your quote from Franz Rosenzweig, because they're experiencing the ABC, XYZ of Judaism. In other words, they haven't experienced the moment of science. So they're looking at words. Do the words make sense or not? I mean, in a certain sense, like with these Jewish renewal people, I'm just going to repeat what I said before. their strength is not because, I mean, they were original people, but their strength is because they were in between worlds. They spoke two languages. They were interpreters, and they knew of a native language which other people could not. The only way other people could understand it is through an interpreter. Like, so we're the translators or transformers of the tradition in a certain sense. Now, some people will say that any kind of translation is like translating the Torah into Greek, which was, the Talmud says, was as difficult as the day that the golden calf was created. That any kind of translation is a distortion and a travesty. So there are many people that will say that this whole endeavor of kind of universalizing or liberalizing Jewish tradition is treacherous, is a religious travesty, and is heretical. And that is a voice also that accompanied me for many years. Like, either I speak the Ptolemaic model, or I shut up and don't tell anyone that I discovered Copernicus. But what if there is something that I know that I can teach, that I need to find somebody else, like somebody who grew up in a different language, and they're the only ones that, yeah, it is difficult. It's also a very difficult thing. Like, so that was very, very powerful. And again, I don't know, we're really in an incipient form, like in a hylic matter, like with kind of chaos, early chaos, this early soup of figuring out ideas for this community. But my sense is that there's a tremendous quest for that.
I think you're right. I think you're right, and I think you put it very well. And I think there is a question of real empowerment, of taking people who feel like Moranos and turning them into, or giving them the community and the network to have a voice, to teach and to share and to inspire. And on that note, I want to ask your permission to do two things. Firstly, because you mentioned the Hasidic melody, the niggin, I did want to sing a niggin together with you, a niggin of your choice, and I'll give you a moment to think about that, because I think there is the cultural element, and I think there is something indescribable in the niggin. We can theorize about the niggin and the power of the niggin, but unless one tastes the niggin, it's trying to learn to swim without in a classroom, without going into water. And then I want to shift the conversation. Perhaps we'll end on this, because I know that your time is precious. I want to shift the conversation towards some more of the conceptual ideas that we've received from our tradition that can be retold in a universal light, in a way that will be both empowering and invigorating for the tradition itself, having to be able to re-see it universally for those that are stuck in less universal takes on these same ideas, and for those outside, because the audience is not just a Jewish audience, but universal audience, for those outside that can find ideas and can be inspired by ideas from Jewish mysticism, that are made collective. And while we're seeing the niggin, you can think about those ideas, because I think that is a big part of the mission here, is about taking the gems and the nuggets of the traditions. And I'm in my own project, I've been looking sort of across all traditions and seeing what shared wisdom and what shared truths and metaphysics and meaning they share. But I think our unique capacity is to share the richness of Judaism, Jewish mysticism, and I think as well. I think just the last point before we move into something experiential, is that I think this project is a universal project, and although we've been speaking in a very Jewish context and about leaving, a Jewish, sort of conception of faith, or very rigid ultra-Orthodox community, I think that we now live in a global village, and the audience, and the participants, and the interaction that I've been receiving is from Muslims and Christians and Buddhists and Hindus, and atheists, and it's a really large spectrum of people, and I think that these messages and the journey of leaving fundamentalism to let's say a more universal place, I think is a universal experience. And I just want to put out the invitation for anyone who's out there that, just like myself and you can share experiential beauties of Jewish mysticism and experiential ideas and meaning, to others, I want to invite our Muslim listeners, our Christian listeners, our Hindu and Buddhist and Baha'i and Zoroastrian, if there are any, whichever faith base you come from, if you've experienced the intimacy and the primacy, the firsthand taste, the fire of religion in your own tradition, please do reach out and come and share this, because this project, I think, is global and is universal. And with that very large invitation, I think we can transition to a niggin. What do you say, Yehudah DovBer?